Last week, the head of the country's central bank floated the idea of dumping the greenback as the world's reserve currency, replacing it with an international currency.
This is a hoax and a scam which is designed to transfer wealth and power from the private sector to the government sector and from the government of the United States to a world government.
And those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN's going to take over global
conspiracy theorists.
They've been crazy, but now they're right.
So in the old days, you used to have this globe that with 180 some odd countries, and a few of those countries had a lot of power, like the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States at various times. But today, you might better look at that globe and say that it's surrounded by huge clouds swirling around the planet. They know no national boundaries. They don't follow any specific sets of laws, and these are the big corporations. They basically control politicians around the world because they have all the money, and politicians always need money to get elected or to run their governments if they're not democratically elected politicians. They control the mainstream press, either through outright ownership or advertising budgets. They have massive amounts of lobbyists in Washington that have tremendous influence on our president and Congress. And they really are calling the shots. They form partnerships with the Chinese and the Taiwanese and the Tibetans, or with the Israelis and Arab nations, with Brazilians and Indians, with whatever country and whatever group of people has resources that they covet. And so for the first time in history, we really have this new form of an empire.
They said in their own writings, from the earliest times to the present, the world they're bringing in is to be a world where everyone who is born, or would be allowed to be born, would be born to serve the state. That would be their sole function. That's if they had a job for you to fulfill or a need for you.
For the first 100 years or so of the United States, after the 1700s, when we freed ourselves from British rule, no corporation was given a charter in the United States unless it served the public good. It had to prove that. And then its charter only lasted for 10 years, or sometimes as long as the project to build a bridge or a canal or something lasted. But it had to be up for review, and it could only get charters if it was shown that it was serving the public interest. That changed, primarily because John D. Rockefeller kind of bribed Delaware and New Jersey to begin with into accepting a different system where he said, listen, if I pay you lots of money in terms of taxes, etc., I want to be licensed to not have to serve the public good. I want to be able to get around that law. And state after state after state changed at that time.
Nations rise and fall. They knew how debt could never be recuperated. They knew that disease or prolonged war could wipe out the population and the future populations that pay off debt. So these guys all work together. That's why it's no surprise that today you have Lord Rothschild coming out pushing the latest scam or religion that we must all believe in, which is global warming, which his personal bank, his family's bank in Switzerland, will be in charge of. They've run the system, the whole economic system of the world for the last 250 years. So why shouldn't they also run the economic system for the next few hundred years?
The economic crash of 2008 and 2009 was an engineered crisis designed to cripple sovereign nations globally to make way for a world currency and a new bank of the world.
China's holding, what, 1.5 trillion worth. All over the world, they're holding U.S. currencies. They want to get out of them in a way where they're not going to lose on their investments. There's going to be a world currency. There's going to be a new reserve currency. They're going to push it through the IMF. That's going to be the banksters that are going to be in charge of it. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Timothy Geithner's comment about global currency is not off the table because it's not off the table and it's going to come. The whole world is ready to bail out of bucks. They just want to do it in a way where they're not going to lose on their investments. That's all that's going on.
All the people around the world, the Japanese who have $1 trillion, the Chinese who have $1 trillion, the Saudis have $1 trillion, the Europeans something similar, they're all going to dump it at the same time. The rush for the exits. And that will then create hyperinflation. When the dollar starts to slide, and this was always the nightmare of Paul Adolph Volcker, who is now sitting in the Obama White House. Once the dollar starts to go, there's nothing to stop it. There's no useful way that you can stop it once it begins to gather momentum. So I think we're facing the probability of some form of dollar panic combined with hyperinflation sometime during the Obama presidency.
Pulling the rug away from under the feet of the people. They're becoming rapidly a non-manufacturing country. Any country that can't manufacture its own goods, even for self-defense, therefore is no longer sovereign, independent, and able to sustain itself, which tells you that this is all part of the plan. Pulling the rug away from under the feet of the people. They're becoming rapidly a non-manufacturing country. Any country that can't manufacture its own goods, even for self-defense, therefore is no longer sovereign, independent, and able to sustain itself, which tells you that this is all part of the plan.
It started with the very beginning when you established that there was a Federal Reserve System given the power of the state to create money out of nothing, and to do so without any regard to will of the people, without any regard to what's behind the money system. In other words, strictly political and economic motives for the bankers and the politicians. Once you granted that power to a group, the Federal Reserve System, the economic crisis was inevitable. This has happened before. Every time in history when the government was given the power, or a group of banks in conjunction with the government was given the power to expand the money supply at will, those economic systems always wound up in crisis and always collapsed. Founders of the Federal Reserve System met on Jekyll Island back in 1910 and were drafting the Federal Reserve Act. One of the things they discussed was how to pass on the inevitable losses to the taxpayers. They knew that inevitably something like this would happen, and they knew that there had to be some way to get out of it without destroying the banks, of course, because they were the banks. And they said, aha, we'll go into partnership with the government, we'll take our cartel agreement and pass it into law, call it the Federal Reserve Act, and we'll make the taxpayer come online and be responsible to bail us out if and when the failure finally comes.
We're going into the greatest depression. There will be no job growth. Unemployment will continue to escalate. Along with it, so too will crime, poverty, kidnappings, boss snappings. And the more things spin out of control, the harder the hammer is going to come down by the federal government to keep everyone in control.
Power is much, much more important to them than money is. Money is only a way to the means. Power is the end result.
The elite's main goal is to destroy national sovereignty and individual independence. To consolidate their grip on power, the banksters create artificial debt bubbles that are mathematically impossible to pay back.
These are those sinister, toxic assets, the complex financial instruments that they talk about but never really name. They're paper based on paper. They're credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, mortgage-backed securities, asset-backed securities, structured investment vehicles, auction rate securities, and so on down the line. It's an immense mass of cancerous, fictitious, speculative paper, bloated in value, impossible to bail out. Triage the derivatives on their books. There's no way to bail out a $1.5 quadrillion black hole of derivatives, but nevertheless they tried.
The Wall Street cronies are crooks. If you leave the vault to the bank open, these people are going to help themselves. The job of the government is to make sure there's somebody there to make sure the vault is closed, and very few people have the combination.
This was an illegal and inappropriate form of casino. The derivatives were being used, and they were being unregulated, and the people were getting 30 to 1, 40 to 1, 50 to 1, and sometimes 100 to 1 profits on the way up. And remember, Derivatives are a zero-sum game. So there's nothing there. It's not like a piece of stock in General Electric or Ford or something like that where there's supposed to be some value. Derivatives have no value. But the very people, Summers and Gettner and all the people at Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan who created these things made not millions or billions but trillions on the way up. And now that these things are crashing, the very same folks are now put in charge of regulating these things and in charge of the bailout, and they are giving money to the very rascals that created this problem, took the profits. The problem cannot be fixed. And this is on Obama's watch right now. This was a pre-registered, pre-organized, predetermined event. Anybody who knows that if you allow the banks to become unregulated financial institutes with tsunami-like, weapons of mass destruction-like financial instruments like derivatives, to allow that to run up to levels that are 50, 100, 200 times the gross domestic product with no value. They know that they are taking the profits on going up, but they also know that the end result is the destruction and gutting of this economy.
It's a more sophisticated form of slavery, and we're going through it today. We see the taxation is going up all the time with the supposed crash of the banks that was not happening out of the blue. It was set up for this time. They could have kept it going for another few years if it suited them, and then crashed all the bubbles. But now is the time. As they say in their own writings, now is the time. It's never been written about in any book that I've found as to who gave these guys the authority or permission to be the international bankers for the world. Why would you even need international bankers? Why would any government agree to use them? Why would you need to use them? Why can't any country create its own money? It tells you there was already an existing superstructure, already in existence, maybe 200-300 years ago, to give these guys permission to somehow be the overlords of all money for all countries.
Barack Obama is a puppet of the New World Order to bring in a World Bank, to destroy the economy of this country, and to bring in global governance. And no matter how likable the fellow is, we as citizens of this country need to stand up and say no.
Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country, because the country is being stolen from us in broad daylight. Not only stolen metaphorically, but financially as well. The numbers don't lie.